Good afternoon and welcome, friends. Welcome to our monthly Framing the Future webinar for November 2025. My name is Gary Allen. I'm the president of the Maryland Forestry Foundation. We are the sponsors of this Framing the Future webinar series, now in its fifth year. You're welcome to join us today. I'm very pleased to have you with us because we have an exciting, interesting topic today, which has been broadly discussed in both policy initiatives and at the local level for some time now, consistent with the state's land preservation goals. Today, of course, I want to remind you we're recording this. It will be available on MarylandForestryFoundation.org website in the coming week. I want to thank you for joining us today. We'll talk more about the future toward the end of this webinar, but for today's session, I want to introduce our moderator, uh, one of our fantastic board members, and our early Mel Fellows, Megan Carr, who's an urban forester with the City of Baltimore. Megan, thank you very much for joining us today and again serving as our host for the webinar series.
Always happy to be here, Gary. Thank you. And thanks to our panelists for being here today. We'll get started with them in just a moment. In the meantime, wanted to give a couple of brief housekeeping notes for our audience members. You can view the recording for this session in about a week and all of our previous sessions over on the Maryland Forestry Foundation website. It's marylandforestryfoundation.org. Look for webinars. While you're on that page, you can also sign up to join our mailing list if you're not already on it, so you can get notification of future topics in this series. If you have questions for our speakers today, please do add those into the conversation. We have some time set aside at the end of today's hour to discuss anything that comes up during their presentations or questions that you have about the programs we're discussing. There's a Q&A function that should pop up at the bottom of your screen. You can enter your questions in there, and we will address those at the end of today's session. So without further ado, we are going to jump into our presentations with our speakers. I am going to go ahead and pull up their slideshow real fast. And also, I will have the pleasure of introducing our speakers, which is going to start with Deborah Herr Cornwell. She, as a licensed landscape architect, Debbie has worked in the private, nonprofit, and government sectors for over the past 30 years. Drawing on her experiences working in a multidisciplinary design firm and as a sole practitioner, she has designed and constructed environmentally sensitive projects for private and government clients. Prior to coming to the Maryland Department of Planning in 2017, she worked for 9 years at the county government level, assisting citizens in navigating the development review and approval process, preserving agricultural lands, and developing local policies. Debbie currently serves as a manager of the Natural and Working Lands Unit in the Research, Review, and Policy Division of MDP. So thanks very much, Debbie.
Thank you, Megan, and good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to speak about Maryland's Protected Lands Dashboard and the progress Maryland has made on protecting our resources and our sensitive environmental areas. I'm providing an overview of the Maryland the Beautiful Act, the Protected Lands Dashboard, and the overall strengths and weaknesses of Maryland's preservation programs. And then we'll have breakouts with our various sister agencies on their programs, on their preservation programs. In recognition of the multiple benefits derived from the protected lands throughout the state, the Maryland the Beautiful Act of 2023 established land conservation goals. And through the combined efforts of our state agencies, our local governments, the federal government, and our nonprofit land trusts, the first goal to conserve 30% by 2030 was achieved in 2024. At that time, we had over 1.8 million of Maryland's 6.1 million acres in preservation. The focus is now on achieving the second goal to preserve 40% of the land in Maryland by 2040, which would total over 2.4 million acres. The first Maryland the Beautiful Plan was developed and published by the Sustainable Growth Cabinet in July 2024 and outlines how to meet the goals in the legislation. We've also been providing annual reports in 2024 and 2025 as also required. The Sustainable Growth Subcabinet, chaired by Secretary Flora of the Maryland Department of Planning, works on land use, development, infrastructure, and resource management that is sustainable and equitable. And to achieve sustainable growth, we must proactively plan for sustainable, affordable, and equitable development in our population centers and appropriate growth areas close to population centers, minimizing our infrastructure costs and preserving green space for resource protection, agricultural resilience, and public access. Next slide, Megan. In support of those efforts, the 2025 Sustainable Growth Policy, signed into law by Governor Moore in April, includes 8 guiding principles designed to direct development towards existing communities and protect natural resources. The 8 principles of land, transportation, economy, housing, equity, ecology, place, and resilience replace the former 12 planning visions and provide a more balanced way of managing land use and development. They aim to make sustainable growth policy simpler, clearer, and easier for everyone involved in planning and development to use effectively. Next slide, please. The Maryland Beautiful Act defined land conservation as the permanent protection of land from development through purchase, donation, perpetual conservation, or an open space easement or fee ownership to preserve the cultural, historical, ecological, or agricultural values of the land. And across the state, this is being accomplished through various efforts that are key priorities for the state's land preservations. It includes working with local communities, counties, municipalities, and private landowners to conserve our natural places and our resources, improving access to nature for all individuals, including communities of color and economically disadvantaged communities, sequestering carbon and greenhouse gas emissions in the lands and waters of the state, focusing conservation work at a large landscape scale that is biologically and ecologically meaningful, stabilizing ecosystems and ecosystem services, and increasing economic opportunities for farmers, rangers, fishers, and foresters. Land conservation is dependent on the amount of financial and staff resources available for easements and for fee simple acquisitions, the willingness of landowners to conserve land, and the real estate market. Financial resources are constrained by variations in transfer tax revenues for land conservation and federal funding, and development pressure varies based on the fluctuations of the real estate market and private interest in low-density greenfield development. Next slide, please. This screenshot of the Protected Lands dashboard shows where protected lands are in the state. A link to the Protected Lands dashboard will be provided in the chat, and you can zoom in and investigate the various protected land categories identified. To track progress towards the state-level land preservation goal, the Maryland Departments of Planning, Natural Resources, Agriculture, and the Maryland Environmental Trust work collaboratively to collect data from federal, state, local, and non-governmental resources, and the dashboard is updated quarterly by the Department of Planning. Next slide, please. The data collected and counted towards the state conservation goals includes Maryland Environmental Trust easements, mouth easements, local purchase of development rights and transferable development rights, local cluster subdivision remainders, private conservation organizations, local land trusts, Marbidco, rural legacy easements, federal program easements, program open space stateside easements, local recreation facilities and parks, including those funded with POS local side funds, DNR state lands, federal parks, and conservation properties. All of these land preservation categories are depicted in the center box of the dashboard in the pie chart, and you can use the slide bar on the right to scroll through the various categories. Next slide, please. As of June of 2025, Maryland had protected over 1.9 million acres, which is almost 31% of Maryland's total land area. For the 5-year period from June 2020 through June of 2025, Maryland has been preserving 135,435 acres per year. Based on this current trend, by 2040, Maryland will have preserved 2,315,198 acres, but will be just shy of our 40 by 40 goal by about 160,000 acres. Next slide, please. Now, the strengths and challenges of our programs. Maryland has been a national leader in land conservation for over 50 years. One of the strengths has been that each of the state's land preservation programs are unique in their statutory purpose and intent and are administered differently. These differences are highly complementary and contribute to the overall state goals for land preservation by focusing on different types of properties. The combination of different programs makes large landscape protection possible. And also, with the different programs having different goals, objectives, and criteria, it provides options for property owners since it isn't a one-size-fits-all program. The success of Maryland's programs has been primarily due to a dedicated funding source in state law. And according to statute, the majority of funding for state land preservation and recreation programs is provided through the collection of a state property transfer tax. This funding mechanism was designed to directly tie development to available funding for open space and recreational facilities for the public good. Maryland is also one of a handful of states that offers income tax benefits to landowners that donate easements. So those would be the Maryland Environmental Trust and other DNR easement programs, as well as MALF. And DNR, MET, and MALF all have strong partnerships with the local government and land trusts. And these relationships help identify and to facilitate these conservation projects. And the presentations that follow from DNR, MET, and MALF will provide more specifics on their individual programs. Next slide, please. Even with all of Maryland's success, we do have challenges. Each of the land conservation programs have specific program criteria that must be met for an acquisition. And with each acre of land preserved, there is a growing responsibility to be a responsible steward of the land. There will be a point in the future where the focus of land conservation will shift from acquiring and protecting more land to ensuring the lands owned by the state and under state-held easements are maintained and well managed. Good stewardship of the lands means something different for state-owned lands versus state-held easement properties, which are private property. Real estate market fluctuations impact the state's ability to successfully acquire properties. When the real estate market is extremely competitive, property owners may have many choices and decide not to sell to the state. Also, while the majority of funding comes from a dedicated funding source, it is a strength. It also means that funding is subject to fluctuations in the real estate market as well as budget shortfalls. An ongoing challenge to land preservation is the residential development needed to accommodate the increased population and commercial development to support economic trends. According to the Maryland State Data Center at MDP, Maryland's population will increase by about 1 million people by 2055. Balancing the growth with conservation, especially in rural areas, will be a major challenge that state and local officials will have to meet to ensure the goals of the Maryland the Beautiful Act are met. And at this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Katrina Tucker and Cheryl Wise to provide an update on DNR's programs. Thanks.
Are you ready?
I am.
Hi there.
I'm so sorry. Let me give your bios real fast. I was having trouble getting my screen controls to pop up with my screen sharing going on. So apologies for the delay. But yes, we are joined next by Katrina Tucker and Cheryl Weiss. Katrina Tucker has been with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources for 7 years, and for the past 2 years, serving as the Conservation Easement Supervisor for the Rural Legacy and the Permanent CREP easement programs in the Land Acquisition and Planning Unit. Prior to joining the Maryland DNR, her career was focused on land use planning, working for various local governments in Virginia and Maryland, in which she served as staff for elected officials, planning commissioners, historic preservation commissions, and a tree commission. Katrina completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Maryland, earned a Master of Urban Environmental Planning from the University of Virginia, and also is credentialed through the American Institute of Certified Planners. After hours, Katrina cherishes family gatherings and time spent with friends, as well as any opportunity to be outdoors. And Cheryl Weiss is the supervisor for the program Open Space stateside team in the Land Acquisition and Planning Unit at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. Cheryl joined the stateside team in 2012 after working in the private real estate, title, and settlement industry and brings a deep understanding of real property title matters to her work at the department. She recently achieved the Certified Land Title Professional designation through the Maryland Land Title Association, which recognizes outstanding title professionals for their leadership, knowledge, contributions to the industry, and commitment to excellence. Cheryl feels incredibly fortunate that her work at DNR allows her to utilize the professional skills that she has gained over her career in the context of land conservation. Outside of work, she enjoys spending time with her family and friends, going to the gym, and walking in the woods. So thanks again for bearing with me.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Katrina. Go ahead into the next slide, Megan. As Debbie just went through the Maryland the Beautiful Act, Cheryl and I are going to address the programs through the Maryland Department of Natural Resources Land Acquisition and Planning Unit that helped us meet the 30 by 30 goal, and these programs, how these programs will continue to help us towards achieving the 40 by 40 goal. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So through land acquisition and planning at the Maryland Department of Natural Resources, we have several different conservation easement options and fee simple acquisitions. Whoops, back up one. Those include the Rural Legacy Program, the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, or CREP permanent easements, and Program Open Space stateside easements and fee simple acquisitions. The Maryland Environmental Trust, who will speak later, offers another conservation easement program for donated easements, and Malf will also speak, and this is so that the characteristics of different properties and different landowners fit different programs. Next slide, please.
So first of all, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I'm going to talk a little bit, there we go, about how these programs are funded. Debbie covered this a little bit in her presentation as well, but the funding I think one more. The funding for DNR's conservation easement programs are funded through program open space generated by the Maryland State Transfer Tax. Each time a property is sold, a portion of the transfer tax that is collected as part of the settlement goes into the program open space fund for land preservation. That also includes transactions, other like refinancing transactions. When a person buys a house or land, 0.5% of the state property transfer tax is collected, which funds program open space. And as Debbie mentioned, this was designed back over 50 years ago to directly tie development to available funding for program open space and recreational facilities for the good of the public. The fund is the source for funding Rural Legacy, CREP permanent easements, program open space stateside, program open space stateside easements, MALF, and MALF. Program Open Space was created in 1969, so we recently celebrated, or somewhat recently, time goes by, the 50th anniversary. It preserves natural areas for public recreation, and that includes the Program Open Space local side component, as well as watershed and wildlife protection across Maryland through fee simple and conservation easement acquisitions. That's the Program Open Space stateside component. Next slide. What is a conservation easement? A conservation easement is a restriction placed on the property to protect its natural resources. If we could go back, please. It's an agreement to limit certain uses and development by extinguishing development rights while allowing continued private use of the land for farming and timber operations. The easement prevents development from taking place on the land in perpetuity while the land remains in private ownership. So for a conservation easement, the property continues to be owned in fee simple by the landowner, but they have agreed to certain terms of their use of the land going forward in perpetuity. And then those restrictions that are placed by the easement run with the land so that if they convey the property or sell it in the future, future owners of the lands will be subject to the same limitations found in the easement document. Next slide, please. There are a number of items that are sort of template elements of the conservation easements. They include no industrial development. Commercial development is quite limited, and there are some very specific examples, such as an at-home childcare facility within a dwelling. Commercial activities that are related to the agricultural use of the property is permitted. And an example of that is a farm stand. Commercial passive recreational uses and activities, for example, hunting, can be permitted. And of course, each easement is designed for protecting the conservation attributes on a specific property. So each easement is created and planned for that specific property. So it varies obviously widely based on the kind of property that's being placed under easement. They do limit residential development if they extinguish or retire the development rights. Next slide. Program Open Space Stateside, along with the other conservation easement programs administered by the Department of Natural Resources, will protect the conservation attributes of the property. So it'll protect the natural, agricultural, forestry, environmental, scenic, cultural, rural, woodland, and wetland characteristics of the property, and seek to maintain viable resource-based land use and proper management of the property. Next slide. Other elements include impervious surface limitations, soil conservation, water quality management plans, which are required by any easement that has an agricultural component. And the water quality plan has to list soil erosion and water quality problems and include a schedule of the implementation to address those issues on the property. Next slide. Another standard term within the conservation easements, stream buffers for improved water quality and wildlife habitat. The program Open Space Stateside easements require a 100-foot forested or naturally vegetated buffer to all streams and waterways on a property. Wetland protection is another element of the standard conservation easement template. Next slide. Many conservation easements require a forest stewardship plans. It depends on the amount of forest, contiguous forest that's on a particular property, whether a forest stewardship plan will be required. If so, the forest stewardship plan, which is developed through the department, includes sustainable timber harvesting, healthy forest and disease management, and management strategies for sensitive habitats. Most easements include a forest non-conversion clause, which means that forested land cannot be converted to non-forest land. Next slide. Conservation easements are voluntary, so go back, please. So the Department of Natural Resources works with willing landowners in the context of acquisition, either in fee simple or for a conservation easement. Conservation easements run with the land. They're legally binding, and whether the property is sold or passed on to heirs, the same terms of the conservation easement that are established by the conservation easement document itself continue to run with the land. They are perpetual. So the deed of conservation easement is recorded in the county land records so that it can be found in a title search. And when somebody sells or otherwise conveys their property, the easement should be picked up by the real estate abstractor, the title abstractor, and reported so that future owners of the property understand what their obligations are with regard to the terms of the conservation easement. Next slide.
Okay, this is Katrina again. I'm going to talk about the Rural Legacy Program and our CREP permanent easement programs. The Rural Legacy Program is established by statute with intended to combat combat sprawl, enhance natural resources, agriculture, forestry, and environmental protection, and to maintain the viability of resource-based land use and proper management of tillable and wooded areas. So they're easements on working lands that preserve and protect our farms, our forests, the rural areas, and the rural economies. However, in order to be able to sell a rural legacy easement, a property must be within a designated rural legacy area. And these are areas that are defined as being rich in a multiple of agricultural, forestry, natural, and cultural resources. The Rural Legacy Program works with rural legacy sponsors that are local governments and private land trusts. And the sponsors identify the rural legacy areas that are going to be geographically designated by the Maryland Board of Public Works. These sponsors work directly with the landowners to bring the easements to the Rural Legacy Program for acquisition. It is a grant-funded program, so the sponsors apply annually to the Rural Legacy Board for participation in the program in order to receive the grant funding to acquire these easements. It is a competitive process for grant awards, and it varies each year depending on the amount of funding allocated to the program through the state budget. The Board of Public Works designates the rural legacy area, and each year that there is funding available, approves the grants that are awarded to our local sponsors for the Rural Legacy Program. The CREP Permanent Easement Program is a program in which the state purchases perpetual conservation easements from willing landowners that requires the continued maintenance of the prescribed CREP conservation practices after expiration of the federal contract, and those easements then are in perpetuity. CREP is a program through the USDA that basically takes land out of cultivation that's either adjacent to streams to provide stream buffers or steep slopes or highly erodible soils. So landowners have a 10 to 15-year contract where they get paid to not cultivate that land and either allow it to be a natural vegetated feature or be in woodlands. This program continues those practices in perpetuity and allows the landowner to actually put the entire property into a permanent easement. So the CREP Permanent Easement Program is only available to landowners who have existing federal CREP contracts. We can do this per a memorandum of understanding between the state and USDA, in which both the state and USDA are seeking to take actions to help reduce the occurrence of runoff, sediment, and nutrient accumulation in the Chesapeake Bay, and will promote enhanced wildlife habitats. The program is also funded through Program Open Space. As of this month, we have 13,352 acres that are preserved across 15 counties in the state. And previously, it was only an option available in 9 counties. Back in January of 2024, so almost 2 years ago, the Board of Public Works approved it for statewide use. So all counties in the state are now eligible to work with their willing landowners who are interested in putting a CREP permanent easement, provided they have a current CREP contract. We're partnering with our county governments and land trusts to administer the program, with the Department of Natural Resources providing the oversight for funding and purchase of these easements. Next slide. Again, so we partner with our county governments. I actually just went this provides a link to our Rural Legacy and CREP local sponsors. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So as I mentioned with CREP, the state purchases perpetual conservation easements, and these are recorded just like POS stateside and rural legacy easement in the county records. And again, it's willing landowners, and that easement basically continues those CREP conservation practices after expiration of their federal contract and in perpetuity. Next slide. And I think I actually I'm not going to address this again because I think I just spoke to it. We will continue. The state has this memorandum of understanding to continue the voluntary program for the purchase of perpetual easements that extends the life of those 10 to 15-year federal contracts. Next slide. And like I said, we have 13,352 acres preserved across 15 counties. The greatest amount of acreage and number of properties currently preserved through this program are in Frederick, Somerset, Washington, Wycomico, and Worcester counties. Those were counties that were originally part of the original 9. And like I said, it's now available throughout the state. Next slide, please. The Rural Legacy Program, different program. So the Rural Legacy Program was created in 1997 to combat sprawl, enhance natural resources, agricultural, forestry, and environmental protection, and to maintain the viability of resource-based land use and proper management of our tillable and wooded areas. And there's the statutory reference citation if anybody's interested. Next slide. The goals of the program are to place conservation easements on working lands that preserve and protect farms, forests, rural areas, and to protect the rural economies. Basically, to protect farms, you were trying to protect a concentration of farms in order to maintain the other ancillary rural economies that are necessary to maintain farming in an area. So that's why it's a designated geographic boundary for our rural legacy areas. And as I said, the program is funded through grant awards to our local sponsors, and those local sponsors are working directly with the local landowners to determine how to direct the funding to best protect vital working landscapes, stream buffers, wetlands, and habitats for native species. Next slide. So we have a designated rural legacy area of at least 1 in each county. Some of our counties, like Baltimore County, actually have 5 rural legacy areas. And it's a grassroots program to protect working resources. And as of yesterday, we have over 133,000 acres protected with conservation easements. And rural legacy does allow fee simple acquisitions, but of the over 990 easements we have like 24 that were fee simple acquisitions. Next slide, please. So in order to be able to sell a rural legacy easement through the program, a property must be within this geographic boundary of a designated rural legacy area. Next slide, please. This map of the state, which I know the scale is a little hard to see, but this shows all of our 36 locally designated rural legacy areas. Back up one, and in the green. And these are determined by with the local land trust or the county governments, but they have to work in concert with the county government in designating these boundaries. And as I said, we've protected over 133,000 acres to date with more than 990 conservation easements. Next slide, please. The program encourages the local governments and our private land trusts to identify those rural legacy areas for designation by the Board of Public Works. And again, they have to apply annually for funding through a competitive grant process for grant awards. When the applications for these grant awards come in, and they're due the second Tuesday in February of every year, they're presented to a Rural Legacy Advisory Committee that reviews the applications, and the Rural Legacy Advisory Committee makes recommendations to the Rural Legacy Board, both for the expansion or designation of a new rural legacy area, as well as how much funding would go to each applicant. The Rural Legacy Advisory Board, which is comprised of the Secretary of Maryland Department of Natural Resources, Maryland Department of Agriculture, and Maryland Department of Planning, they in turn review the applications each year and make recommendations to the Governor and Board of Public Works as to which rural legacy areas will be designated and funded. The Board of Public Works designates the rural legacy areas and approves the grants for rural legacy funding. Next slide, please. Just as a summation, we have over 133,100 acres protected on more than 990 working farms and forested property. We have a rural legacy area in every county, and we have continued strong interest from willing landowners. Next slide, please. Cheryl, I'll turn it back over to you.
Program Open Space Stateside was established in 1969, and it symbolizes Maryland's long-term commitment to conserving natural resources while providing exceptional outdoor recreation opportunities. I think Debbie mentioned it that Maryland has been a leader in land conservation for a long time. I know that when I have the opportunity to meet with colleagues from other states and jurisdictions, that the program Open Space Stateside model and the dedicated funding is one that not everybody has. So it preserves natural areas for public recreation and watershed and wildlife protection across the state through acquisition of fee simple land and conservation easements. Fee simple acquisitions are managed by DNR as state parks, state forests, wildlife and fishery management areas, and they are primarily funded again with the state property transfer tax revenue. Next slide. So one question that we often get is, how do we find land to add to the state parks? I'm in the land acquisition and planning unit. We're the ones who facilitate these transactions. And some of the ways are that either the land acquisition and planning program administrator or the field personnel, so the rangers that are out at the park and other staff, are contacted by a landowner. Sometimes because people are managing lands over time for a long period of time and they've been neighbors with landowners and they know the families and they know the families over generations, the landowners or the next generation of landowners will reach out to the personnel at the managing units to say, hey, I think that we're ready to sell our land. So that's one way. Another way is that realtors we've worked with in the past on transactions. So like any real estate transaction, some of our sellers are represented by realtors. And we've worked really hard to try and not everybody thinks right off the bat. Not all people in the real estate industry think of the Department of Natural Resources as a purchaser for property. So we try to get them to get the word out in their professional networks that if one of their colleagues or if they themselves have a property that is immediately adjacent to or close in vicinity to a state park or state forest or wildlife management area, that they should call the land acquisition and planning unit and see whether there's any interest on the part of the state. The land acquisition and planning stateside team coordinates directly with the land managers, so the park rangers and park managers, forest managers, to find out what their priorities are in a specific area, to see whether we can reach out to the landowners and find out. And sometimes when we do send out interest letters in one of those efforts, it turns up a number of people who turn out to be interested in finding out about conveying their land to the department. We also monitor the real estate listings daily, basically. So those are some of the ways that they come in. Next slide, please. The acquisition process itself is a 12 to 18 month process for program open space stateside. It includes a multidisciplinary stewardship review, due diligence period, negotiations with the landowner, and coordination with the Office of the Attorney General. The project gets presented to the Maryland Board of Public Works for approval, and then the acquisition goes through the closing process. And that applies to both fee simple and conservation easement acquisitions. For a conservation easement acquisition, obviously there's the added element of planning the easement. Easement planning is a big piece of that. Once settlement occurs for a fee simple acquisition, the managing unit is notified that DNR now owns the property and that it has become part of their land unit and that they are responsible for it, which is kind of an important message that we send out after settlement on a fee simple acquisition. Next slide. Close to 360,000 acres have been protected using the program open space stateside funding source. That includes both fee simple and conservation easement acquisitions. And DNR managed lands provide outdoor recreational opportunities across the state in every county. Stateside works with willing landowners on fee simple and conservation easement acquisitions, and there is strong interest in land conservation under the program. And going back to the sort of families of long-term landowners in the area of a state park or a state forest, sort of one of the really gratifying things about working with those families is they're very committed to the long-term conservation of their property, and they are glad to have the opportunity for their property to be conserved and to remain basically the way their grandfather remembered it and their parents remembered it and the way they remember it. So that's a very sort of satisfying aspect of working with landowners on these kinds of acquisitions. Next slide. DNR partners with land trusts that have a cooperative agreement with the Maryland Environmental Trust or local jurisdictions on some acquisition projects. And we do engage land trust partners and get help and assistance from the local jurisdictions on both fee simple and conservation easement projects. And if engaged, the land trust partner administers the project on BNR's behalf and in coordination with the department. Next slide.
Okay, this is Katrina again. Just want to touch one of the other programs through land acquisition and planning, in addition to our program Open Space Stateside, CREP, and Rural Legacy. We also administer grant programs that provide grants to local governments, land trust, nonprofit organizations to acquire and develop land for open space and recreational purposes. So this includes what we call Program Open Space Local Side, the Community Parks and Playgrounds program, and the Green Space Equity program. And there's more information on our website as to who to contact, and the link to that webpage is right there. Next slide. This is the staff contact information, including my information and the folks that work with me. And go ahead. And you can also go to the next slide. And this is the program Open Space Stateside contact information. And last slide. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl and Katrina, for a lot of great info. That was really interesting. So very much appreciated. We have two more speakers today. Next up is Dan Scalos. Dan received a bachelor's degree from SUNY ESF in 2003 and a master's degree from UC Davis in 2012. He was a waterfowl biologist in California for 20 years, where many of the positions he worked in aimed to assess the value of easements and enhancement programs on working lands for waterfowl and shorebird species. He has worked at MET for a little over a year as the easement program manager. So welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, so again, my name is Dan Scalos. I am the easement program manager at Maryland Environmental Trust. I'm sitting in for John Turgeon, who is our director and is out today. For those of you who don't know, next slide, please. Maryland Environmental Trust was established in 1967. It makes us one of the oldest land trusts in the country. Our first easement was established in 1971, and since then, MET has managed to conserve just shy of 143,000 acres in the state of Maryland. We currently hold or co-hold 1,188 conservation easements. A little more than 80% of those are what we call donated easements. And so Cheryl and Katrina kind of fleshed some of this stuff out very nicely. A donated easement is essentially where a landowner has donated rights, essentially development rights, and they donate those to a grantee, which is the trust, in exchange for tax incentives to not develop the land. MET also has 174 purchase easements, which will make a little bit more sense on the next slide. But for a period of time in the late 90s and early 2000s, when some of the purchase programs were starting, MET was already an established land trust, and so we administered some of those programs. These days, we don't really deal in most purchase programs, other than some that are conducted in cooperation with the military. And so most of our sort of easements coming in now would be donated easements. Occasionally we get these other easements called bargain sale easements, where land trusts use federal funding to purchase an easement on a property, but those are relatively rare. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, you can see on this slide, during the late 90s and early 2000s, MET administered a couple of purchase programs, which really boosted the amount of acreage. I think you can take away from that is if you have a funding source, you can conserve quite a bit of land. But the other thing that might be a little bit more concerning is that you can see it starting to tail off here. Is that land conservation in the sense of these easements and locking up land is really like a finite thing. You only have so much out there, and so we may be sort of in the period of sort of diminishing acreage in terms of what's available. That said, our annual goals are still 10 easements and 1,000 acres every single year. We consider that sort of the low end of the spectrum, so to speak. In 2026, when I began my work here with MET, we only closed on 3 easements for 334 acres, but that's simply because my predecessor very astutely closed out all of her projects in July of 2024 when she retired. And so I started in October, and my coworker Matt Ludington and I have managed to reestablish our project pipeline. It's a very pipeline-driven process, as Cheryl and Katrina had gone over. Our process and our deed restraints are very similar to all these other programs. It needs to meet committee obligations and trust oversight, or board of trustees oversight, and also the board of public works. So it takes about 6 months to get an easement through the entire process, and that's actually quite fast. I mean, that'd be the fastest would be about 6 months. So again, it's a pipeline sort of fed process. We have 21 easements right now slated for or projected to record in 2027 for just shy of 2,000 acres. Next slide, please. And so if I had a mulligan on this slide, I would probably call it engagement, capacity, and direction. But really all I'm trying to get to here is within our sort of own planning, we need to sort of assess where we're going to go in terms of going forward. And what I mean by that is setting sort of benchmarks for certain land conservation before we get to, say, the 40 by 40 goals. Like once we reach 40 by 40 goals, I don't think we want to look back and see how well we did in a sense. So the idea here is, 15 years ahead of time is to be proactive and start to look within what we already have in terms of outline priorities and sort of establish some benchmarks within that. And so, as Megan mentioned, I spent 20 years in California. What has amazed me in the last year is just how forward-thinking land conservation has been in the state of Maryland. The timing, we're talking 50 to 60 years ago when this legislation was passed. It established really, flexible framework and funding sources for all of this to occur. And part of the process over time within DNR has been to develop these all of these data, this geospatial data that sort of gets at various values of land. And within the sort of donated easement structure, at least, like we have like the utmost flexibility. Like when you think about what Cheryl and Katrina had mentioned, rural legacy, for example, is confined to an area. MET is not confined to any areas within the state of Maryland. It is broadly the state of Maryland. You just need donated rights to work with us. And what tends to work best in that sort of framework is larger tracts of land that have donated rights. And so within that, we really are looking for ecological value. And so what I would like to do is sort of set some benchmarks within that sort of ecological value, within the data that we have to sort of move forward. And I point to the State Wildlife Action Plan here, just in case folks aren't aware of that. It's a very important plan that we have engaged on here in the last few months with Wildlife and Heritage Program that not only covers land conservation, it covers conservation just broadly. It covers species conservation, the conservation of different, particularly rare and endangered taxa. But within the framework of land conservation, this is where we sort of speak to the issues that we see going forward, and we provide direction on how to deal with those issues, how to overcome obstacles. And the important part about this document is it faces a number of different ways. One, policymakers look at this document, which can influence policy. And I think the other one that's maybe less known is the public also has input on this document. And I think it's important for folks to review it, particularly once the upcoming document is done. I think it's important for everybody to review and reflect and comment on. But within that, within the sort of direction here, setting these goals to try to attain them in the next 15 years is important. Also, setting some benchmarks for capacity, within MET and DNR in general. Like obviously we have some funding issues right now. but that doesn't mean, we can't look for ways of building capacity otherwise, looking at things like technology. We just hosted a roundtable event last week with our land trust partners that looked at new technologies and ways of processing easements to be more efficient with our time, but also more technologically advanced ways of identifying what are good easements that fit our various niches. So building that land or that capacity within ourselves and also within our partners is really important. And then, like I mentioned before, sort of approach to landowner outreach as we move forward, I think is really important. And I'll get into like an example of that here in the next slide. So again, we just need to identify the sort of target criteria. And within geospatial mapping, once you have a sort of target layer, so to speak, you can tie that to other information in order to conduct your outreach. And so, if you're familiar, this is Baltimore County. What I've displayed here is what we call the BioNet layer, and it kind of gives you an idea of maybe biodiversity or ecological value of a given land area, and gives us some sort of benchmarks to start with. Now, if the area is, for example, is within the darker tier here, the black tier, it doesn't mean that the land is not ecologically valuable, because there is other things that sort of build this layer, like connectivity and things like that. And so it's not like it's off limits to approach people that are outside of this. But if we were going to prioritize as an agency folks to outreach to, this is a good start. So it gives us a way of assessing progress within this, creating some goals, and then coordinating that outreach with our land trust partners. And once we do that, we sort of evaluate and adjust and move forward from there. Next slide, please. And so just to wrap it up, our direction for MET in the next year is to simply meet our MFR goals. Again, 10 easements and 1,000 acres is relatively easy for us to make. We're certainly moving to go beyond that. We're looking to build capacity, within ourselves and also within our land trusts, and then also engage stakeholders, in particular the public. We really want to conduct as much outreach as possible. I think if you were to go and ask, 10, average people if they knew what a conservation easement was, I would be shocked if you were managed to get one even that knew what they were. So, just outreach into the public, making people more aware of what conservation easements are, is just a way of making people understand the importance of them and maybe bringing more of those to the table. And then again, when we do that outreach, it's really going to be sort of refined initially within some really targeted properties to try to boost that ecological value. And one thing that I wish I would have included on here, if you're interested in learning more about MET or have some follow-up questions, you can find us on our website at dnr.maryland.gov /MET. And I want to thank you for your time.
All right, thank you very much, Dan. And for our final speaker today, bringing us home, we have Hannah Turner, who is the lead administrator of the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation. Hannah joined MALPF as an administrator in 2014, where she manages easement acquisitions, stewardship, compliance and legislative matters, general inquiries, and requests from landowners. In her role as lead administrator, Hannah trains staff in standard and new procedures. Prior to joining the MALPF team, Hannah was a paralegal for the Boulder County Parks and Open Space Program in Colorado for 5 years.
Okay, thank you, Megan. Can everyone hear me okay?
You sound good.
Anyone? Okay, thank you. Our program, the MALPF program, was established in 1977, and our first easement was recorded in 1979. Our statutory goal, our mission statement, is to ensure the production of food and fiber for the citizens of Maryland. And much like Rural Legacy, this is a voluntary program. I pulled out some of the slides that I didn't include some of this information, but again, we are a voluntary program. our easements are in perpetuity and they do run with the land. We memorialize this by recording deeds of easement in land records. And there is a limited ability to reserve some lot rights. We have 4 basic criteria for qualifying for our program. One is size. We need a minimum of 50 acres unless a property is adjacent to another preserved property. It doesn't even have to be a MALF property, as long as that preservation document is at least as restrictive as MALF. If the total of that property and the less than 50 acre property is being applied for is a minimum of 50 acres, then we'll take the smaller parcel. So also soils are a big qualifier for us. There needs to be at least 50% qualifying soils, which are USDA classes 1 through 3 or woodland groups 1 through 2, which don't really exist anymore. There needs to be some conversion, but our statute still has this older language. So we do our best, and our counties do the best to convert the current types of woodland soils into something that will resemble or take place of the woodland groups. If a property has both forested land and land in tillage or pasture, other types of ag production, then the soils criteria goes up to 60%. The location is important. We want to talk about development pressure is a big factor. MALF also likes to preserve properties in large blocks of land. So that is what has been determined as to be the best way to garner big lots of, or big portions of preserved areas. We do have some counties that don't agree with that, and they want to be able to preserve bits and pieces here and there. We have accommodated that on a much smaller scale than those counties would care for, with a very small percent in their ranking system that they can give points or take away points depending on where those smaller properties are located. Similar to rural legacy, we don't require an area, but we do have some counties will establish a priority preservation area, and that's an area where they designate, the county designates, showing what area or areas they want to concentrate preservation efforts in. But it is not a requirement for the counties to have one, although I think most do at this point. And it's not a requirement for MALF to put an easement on a property if it's not in a priority preservation area. And as far as our, development rights, we need to have at least one development right left for a property in order for us to purchase and extinguish that development right, or development rights on the property. So we subtract development rights from the total on a tax parcel for existing dwellings. If any property is going to be withheld from the easement, we assign development rights, a right or rights to that in most cases. And I mentioned briefly about reserving lot rights. With certain lot right reservations, we'll also deduct a development right from the total of that sum will represents how many development rights are available to be extinguished. We are also funded partially through the POS fund, and we also get a percentage of the county's transfer tax, which is an interesting setup that has occurred when the county, when a property in the county that is in ag production is being sold, or that is designated as agriculture, they will take out, if that property is sold and taken out of agriculture, then that's when a county transfer tax comes into play. And a portion of that is sent to MALF, or to the state. The counties do retain a portion, but what the county retains needs to be spent only on preservation efforts. So they can use it for MALF's matching program to contribute to purchasing bigger or more easements. They can use it for rural legacy or any other land preservation program, again, as long as it follows the restrictions or the limitations that MALF has. And I think that that's really it. I think that Katrina and Cheryl really shared a lot that is similar with our program. And that's all we have. My information is at the bottom of the slide. If anyone has questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Hannah. And thanks to all of our speakers for some great presentations and an informative chat today. I'm going to keep this slide up for just a moment if folks want to grab a screenshot for Hannah's contact information. But as of that, I think we just have one question in the queue as of now. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen as of now so that I can have full control over all of my various Zoom buttons. All right, so a question from Lawrence, who asks, I am on the board of one of the few urban land trusts in Maryland. Most of these programs and funds are appropriately targeted at preserving various rural values. What, if any, programs can be used to support urban community land preservation, whether for environmental protection, passive or active recreation, in furtherance with the new MDP principles for smart growth and livable communities?
I can jump on that. Megan, this is Katrina.
Please.
There are programs through POS, what we call local side, which includes the Community Parks and Program, as well as the new Green Space Equity Program. The slide we had for local grants includes the link to our webpage, where you can find out more information about that. And the contact person for that is Margaret Lasher with Land Acquisition and Planning at DNR.
Great. Thank you, Katrina. And I do want to remind folks that the recording for this for today's session is going to be up on marylandforestryfoundation.org in a little over a week or thereabouts. So if other questions emerge, you'll be able to either review the presentation to see if the information you're hoping for was covered, but it's a lot of info, a very rich session today, but also we'll have the contact information for folks available on the various slides as you go through, so you can follow up with the appropriate point person. I'm not currently seeing any other questions coming in. Gary, did you have questions for our panelists today?
You know, as we were preparing for this presentation today, I did receive one question, which I must admit I was not able to respond to at all, so I'm going to present it to the entire panel. There is, for example, a designated area in Prince George's County, which is designated as a state park called the Beltsville Preservation Area, or the old, what is the name of the?
Cultural Research Center?
No, what is the land thing that Pam is in charge of?
Oh, Bells Woods.
Beltwoods, that's the one. Beltwoods, we got a question. So it's Beltwoods. And the property next to it, which is the Six Flags property, has just come up for redevelopment. Six Flags is closed after over 30 years. Because it was a recreational site and not a housing site, it had maintained a buffer area along its fenced land next to the Beltwoods site. And the net effect is, the question came up is, in light of the likely change in the site's activities and a proposal to make it into a residential site as opposed to a recreational site like it was at Six Flags, how would a group of stakeholders that are interested in the property help encourage or require the county or the state to enter into an agreement to protect a buffer area around the Belt Woods, since it's one of the state's most historic land preservation sites, protecting some of the oldest woods in the entire state, dating back to actually pre-Revolutionary War times. So I was at a total loss as to tell them who to contact, what the state's role might be in helping to protect a buffer area around that site. And I just noticed, since we have a number of you on land preservation, that perhaps one of you might know what advice we might offer in a question like that. Looks like nobody really has a good answer. Well, let me suggest that Deborah, if obviously they're going to be in touch with the Maryland Department of Planning, but since the state is interested in protecting these sites that where easements already exist, and obviously Beltwoods is an area where an easement already exists, I was hopeful that if we find a way to advise these stakeholders at the local level about how they can continue to foster the protection of that site, that we might have a contact. So I'd like to ask Deborah, if you would help us, the Maryland Department of Planning, to follow up on that question at some point, so that the foundation or the Department of Planning or Maryland DNR might offer some encouragement to these folks who are very interested, as the county considers a redevelopment proposal for the entire site. And that is, again, the Six Flags sites next to Beltwoods in Prince George's County, that it's presented this question.
And I think you're right that the focus should be on the local planning process first, and making the connections with local planning office or with Maryland National Capital Parks Commission, whichever that connection. I'm not sure which connection would be the most appropriate, but getting letting the local government know that there is a interest in doing that. It can be included into the local jurisdictions that are currently preparing their LPPRPs. So that's your land preservation, parks, and recreation plans. And each of the counties do those. And it would be important to get that into that plan if that was going to be an area that they would like to see focused on. Need to talk to local planning staff, and as that plan is being developed, make sure that that's included in the local planning process. So that would be one step. There's other connections. So I'm happy to help make those connections if somebody if you want to pass my information on.
I will, Deborah, I'll specifically pass on your contact information. I'll only note that in addition to Prince George's County, Maryland National Capital Park and Planning is involved in these decisions, and that may, I don't know whether that changes the nature of the process or not, but it certainly might change the nature of who to talk to in the land preservation stuff, particularly since it involves what many people consider to be a very visible and important easement in the area. I don't have any further questions. Are there any other questions in the queue that we need to touch on, Megan?
Not at this time. So yeah, just I'll add my thanks to our panelists. I once again really appreciate everyone's presentations today.
I want to thank all of you, and Deborah, for your leadership in helping put this together, and for each and every one of you for the amazing depth and breadth of your presentations today. My goodness, it was a very kind of packed set of presentations with a lot of information. I myself are going to have to go back and reread a couple of these slides so we better understand it. This is an important issue, I think, in the future of land preservation in Maryland because of this state goal. And I noticed in the very beginning, Deborah, and yours, that at least under current trends, we're likely to fall short of what we want in 2040. And I know a lot of people want to identify how they might encourage the accomplishment of this goal. And the good news is you've already achieved the 2031 in record time. I think we're really pleased about that, many of the stakeholders I've talked to. So let's see if we can at least figure out a way to encourage and strengthen the effort so that we make the 2041 and have a little bit more confidence in our ability to do so, maybe in the next 5 years or so between now and 2031 when we reach the 5 million tree goal. That's also a goal that we're tracking that has a similar kind of consequence to this one. Friends, again, I want to thank all of you for gathering with us. For those of you who have joined us today as listeners for these webinar presentations, I want to thank you and invite you again to tune in on the third Thursday of each month, particularly in the coming month of December. We have a very exciting presentation. I can simply say we're going to be talking about one of the most ubiquitous phrases in land preservation in Maryland, and that is the thing called right tree, right place. You hear that phrase everywhere. We're going to be talking about what that really means in the land action programs of a specific jurisdiction. In this case, Prince George's County, one of the jurisdictions that continues to lose forest cover. Under the most recent studies, they're losing between 3,000 and 5,000 acres annually. As a matter of fact, I think that's what we're talking about, or something in that area. We're going to be talking about how their public works department manages their properties in Prince George's County to help protect and expand forest cover in the years ahead. Again, if you're interested in how that phrase actually works in reality, join us on the third Thursday of December at 1 o'clock. Until then, I want to thank all of you for tuning in to this broadcast. And Megan, thank you for doing a wonderful job moderating it, and Deborah for kicking us off. Friends, we're going to close this off, and I want to thank all of you and wish all of you a happy holiday season in the upcoming Thanksgiving. Take care, friends, and bye-bye.